The Disabled Soldier by Oliver Goldsmith. No observation is more common, and at the same time more true, than that one half of the world are ignorant how the other half lives. The misfortunes of the great are held up to engage our attention, are enlarged upon in tones of declamation, and the world is called upon to gaze at the noble sufferers. The great, under the pressure of calamity, are conscious of several others sympathizing with their distress, and have at once the comfort of admiration and pity. There is nothing magnanimous in bearing misfortunes with fortitude, when the whole world is looking on. Men in such circumstances will act bravely even from motives of vanity. But he who in the veil of obscurity can brave adversity, who without friends to encourage, acquaintances to pity, or even without hope to alleviate his misfortunes, can behave with tranquillity and indifference, is truly great. Whether peasant or courtier, he deserves admiration and should be held up for our imitation and respect. While the slightest inconveniences of the great are magnified into calamities, while tragedy mouths out their sufferings in all the strains of eloquence, the miseries of the poor are entirely disregarded. And yet some of the lower ranks of people undergo more real hardships in one day than those of a more exalted station suffer in their whole lives. It is inconceivable what difficulties the meanest of our common sailors and soldiers endure without murmuring or regret, without passionately declaiming against Providence or calling their fellows to be gazers of their intrepidity. Every day is to them a day of misery, and yet they entertain their hard fate without repining. With what indignation do I hear an Ovid, a Cicero, or a Robutan complain of their misfortunes and hardships, whose greatest calamity was that of being unable to visit a certain spot of earth to which they had foolishly attached an idea of happiness. Their distresses were pleasures compared to what many of the adventuring poor every day endure without murmuring. They ate, drank, and slept. They had slaves to attend them, and were sure of subsistence for life, while many of their fellow creatures are obliged to wander without a friend to comfort or assist them, and even without shelter from the severity of the season. I have been led into these reflections from accidentally meeting some days ago a poor fellow whom I knew when a boy, dressed in a sailor's jacket and begging at one of the outlets of the town with a wooden leg. I knew him to have been honest and industrious when in the country, and was curious to learn what had reduced him to his present situation. Wherefore, after giving him what I thought proper, I desired to know the history of his life and misfortunes, and the manner in which he was reduced to his present distress. The disabled soldier, for such he was, though dressed in a sailor's habit, scratching his head and leaning on his crutch, put himself into an attitude to comply with my request, and gave me his history as follows. As for my misfortunes, master, I can't pretend to have gone through any more than other folks, for except for the loss of my limb and my being obliged to beg, I don't know any reason, thank heaven, that I have to complain. There is Bill Tibbs of our regiment. He has lost both his legs and an eye to boot, but thank heaven it is not so bad with me yet. I was born in Shropshire. My father was a labourer and died when I was 5 years old, so I was put upon the parish. As he had been a wandering sort of man, the parishers were not able to tell to what parish I belonged or where I was born. So they sent me to another parish, and that parish sent me to a third. I thought in my heart they kept sending me about so long that they would not let me be born in any parish at all. But at last, however, they fixed me. I had some disposition to be a scholar, and was resolved at least to know my letters. But the master of the workhouse put me to business as soon as I was able to handle a mallet, and here I lived an easy kind of life for 5 years. I only wrought 10 hours in the day, and had my meat and drink provided for my labour. It was true I was not suffered to stir out of the house, for fear, as they said, I should run away. But what of that? I had the liberty of the whole house and the yard before the door, and that was enough for me. I was then bound out to a farmer, where I was up both early and late, but I ate and drank well, and liked my business well enough till he died, when I was obliged to provide for myself, so I was resolved to go seek my fortune. In this manner I went from town to town, worked when I could get employment, and starved when I could get none. When happening one day to go through a field belonging to a justice of the peace, I spied a hare crossing the path just before me, and I believe the devil put it into my head to fling my stick at it. Well, what will you have on it? I killed the hare, and was bringing it away when the justice himself met me. He called me a poacher and a villain, and collaring me, desired I would give an account of myself. I fell upon my knees, begged his worship's pardon, and began to give a full account of all that I knew of my breed, seed, and generation. But though I gave a very true account, the justice said I could give no account. So I was indicted at the sessions, found guilty of being poor, and sent up to London to Newgate in order to be transported as a vagabond. People may say this and that about being in jail, but for my part I found Newgate as agreeable a place as I ever was in all my life. I had my belly full to eat and drink, and did no work at all. This kind of life was too good to last forever, so I was taken out of prison after 5 months, put on board of ship, and sent off with 200 more to the plantations. We had but an indifferent passage, for being all confined to the hold, more than 100 of our people died for want of sweet air, and those that remained were sickly enough, God knows. When we came ashore, we were sold to the planters, and I was bound for 7 years more. As I was no scholar, for I did not know my letters, I was obliged to work among the negroes, and I served out my time, as in duty bound to do. When my time was expired, I worked my passage home, and glad I was to see old England again, because I loved my country. I was afraid, however, that I should be indicted for a vagabond once more, so did not much care to go down into the country, but kept about the town and did little jobs when I could get them. I was very happy in this manner for some time, till an evening, coming home from work, 2 men knocked me down, and then desired me to stand. They belonged to a press gang. I was carried before the justice, and as I could give no account of myself, I had no choice left whether to go on board a man of war or list for a soldier. I chose the latter, and in this post of a gentleman I served 2 campaigns in Flanders, was at the battles of Val and Fontenoy, and received but 1 wound through the breast here, but the doctor of our regiment soon made me well again. When the peace came on, I was discharged, and as I could not work because my wound was sometimes troublesome, I listed for a landman in the East India Company's service. I have fought the French in 6 pitched battles, and I verily believe that if I could read or write, our captain would have made me a corporal. But it was not my good fortune to have any promotion, for I soon fell sick, and so got leave to return home again with £40 in my pocket. This was at the beginning of the present war, and I hoped to be set on shore and to have the pleasure of spending my money. But the government wanted men, and so I was pressed for a sailor before ever I could set foot on shore. The boatswain found me, as he said, an obstinate fellow. He swore he knew that I understood my business well, but that I shammed Abraham to be idle. But God knows I knew nothing of sea business, and he beat me without considering what he was about. I still had my £40, and that was some comfort to me under every beating, and the money I might have had to this day, but that our ship was taken by the French, and so I lost all. Our crew was carried into Brest, and many of them died, because they were not used to life in a jail, but for my part it was nothing to me, for I was seasoned.
One night, as I was asleep on the bed of boards with a warm blanket about me, for I always loved to lie well, I was awakened by the boatswain, who had a dark lantern in his hand. "Jack," says he to me, "will you knock out the French sentry's brains?" "I don't care," I said, striving to keep myself awake, "if I lend a hand." "Then follow me," he says, "and I hope we shall do business." So up I got, and tied my blanket, which was all the clothes I had, about my middle, and went with him to fight the Frenchmen. I hate the French, because they're all slaves and wear wooden shoes. Though we had no arms, one Englishman is able to beat 5 French at any time. So we went down to the door where both sentries were posted, and rushing upon them, seized their arms in a moment, and knocked them down. Thence 9 of us ran together to the quay, and seizing the first boat we met, got out of the harbour and put to sea. We had not been here 3 days before we were taken up by the Dorset privateer, who were glad of so many